Welcome to WPS After Hours Podcast, a presentation of the Public Information Office. We take you beyond the headlines to get the story behind the stories on the issues that impact you. Today's episode holds a roundtable discussion on the topic of public order policing in our community. The panel includes over 70 years of policing experience with members from special events, crowd management, and the police liaison team. And now, settle in, grab your coffee. Here is your host.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to WPS After Hours. Today's podcast is special because we have more guests than we typically have. I'm here to wrangle up this table by myself, and today we're going to be talking about the fundamental concept of public order policing within the community, talking about what it is, what it isn't, talk about some planning, and I'd like to start by introducing our guests because we have over 70 years worth of Winnipeg Police Service expertise combined at this table. I'd like to begin with introducing at the end here Sergeant Colin Smith. He's a member of our crowd management unit, and we will get into that aspect of public order policing shortly, as well as Constable Rachel Vertone, Indigenous Partnership Constable and Police Liaison Team member. So thank you very much for joining us. My name's Danny McKinnon. I work in the Public Information Office. I'm a constable. And over to my right is Patrol Sergeant Brian Wurm. He's in our special events section of the Winnipeg Police Service. Now, all of these individuals are part of the public order policing in some aspect, and we're going to break that down. To begin, though, I'd like to just talk about what is the backbone of public order policing? What is the backbone of fundamental rights for Canadians? The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms provides us all as Canadians with very fundamental rights such as freedom of expression and freedom of opinion, freedom of religion, and freedom to gather in public assembly. But often these freedoms come in large groups, gatherings, parades, protests even, and some of these events are planned and some of them are not planned. And so that's why we really want to dig into our public order policing framework and touch on how this whole process takes place. So who wants to start us off here? Colin, can you give us the sort of fundamental layout of what the heck is public order policing?
Public order policing is a framework that the service uses to police all measure of public events within the community.
And during that framework, let's talk about the pieces that make up that framework.
Well, I think the best answer to that is there's several units in our contemporary framework that essentially deal with three components of any public event. And I think it's best described as a pre-event, during the event, and a post-event. And all three of us here today, I think, represent various aspects of that stage.
Okay, so Brian, you work in special events, and I understand that's like a very specialized event planner with some very, very trained criteria within your unit. So let's start by talking about what is the special events unit, who makes up your special events unit, and why do you exist?
So it's a relatively new unit for us. It was normally a much smaller unit. One person dealt with a much smaller mandate of events. But now as the number of events has increased and the scale and the frequency has increased, we've increased the size of our special events unit now. We've got a special events commander, myself as the patrol sergeant, and I also have two constables that work with me on a planning team. And our goal, our mandate, is to plan for events that fall into a much larger category where we may have to integrate numerous divisions within the police service. And our job then is to come up with a plan, an administrative plan, a logistics support plan, a deployment plan for those resources for whatever the event is. So the idea being that we try and get as much information on the event as we can, and we determine what the most effective and efficient deployment of police resources would be.
Good. So in a moment, I will ask you how you're gathering that information. But before we do that, Rachel, Police Liaison Team, what exactly is that team and who makes up the Police Liaison Team?
So the Winnipeg Police Service, we trained about 20 members a couple years ago. So the Police Liaison Team is a resource of communication. So we're put into place, we're out of our Division 51, which is the Community Relations Division, and we are put out to connect with community partners, anybody who is exercising their right to demonstrate or protest, and then we give them the right information on how they can do that peacefully, lawfully, and safely. And then we connect with everybody else and ensure that that's carried through.
Great, thank you. Brian, I'm going to come back to you.
Okay.
I thought it might be easiest if we took an example of a typical planned type of event, and let's walk through the beginning stages to the execution stage of this. Say, could we do a parade?
Sure.
Okay. Has there been a recent one that you could actually talk about?
Yeah, we've had a number of smaller events and we've had a number of larger events recently. Most familiar to most people would be the Pride Parade that just happened a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. We've also had most recently the Whiteout Parade or Whiteout parties. Unfortunately, not as many as we would like maybe, but we certainly had a number of those. Those were all large events where we deployed police resources for them. For the purposes of helping and facilitating that event to occur. Not necessarily leading it or guiding it, but we were certainly in place to facilitate it and assist it. We also have a number of smaller events that happen almost weekly. School events, most people have seen a Remembrance Day parade or something like that, where we've had those, or a number of events where people feel that they need to take to the roadway, to move from point A to point B. We manage and support all of those processes. For the smaller events, we have what's called a parade permit, and that's through the city. It's a free permit. If we don't get a parade permit application, then we can't support that event. On a very rare occasion, we may end up allowing or issuing a parade permit, but due to operational requirements somewhere else, we may have to pull those officers back. And I think most people would understand that, parades are maybe not as important as some other events that the police deal with. If it happens where a group wants to do an event where maybe they don't have insurance or they can't get insurance or they don't want police involvement, and that happens, there is a way of having the event without having police involvement. And what we tell them at that point is that you are allowed to be on the sidewalk. You can walk anywhere you want to go on a sidewalk. You can have your flags, you can have your banners, you can do whatever, but you have to follow the traffic bylaws. The other option then is that you could use something in a city park, right? You can go to the city, get a parks permit. At that point, you can have whatever event you want. And there's a number of parks in the city that are large enough for that. The other thing that you can do, and again, it's a bit of a cost, but you could hire special duty and have officers assigned to your event. So even without a parade permit, certainly they're there.
So it sounds like, to just recap, you gave a lot of permit information, but in a nutshell, with a little bit of planning on the organizer's part, it seems like it would be fairly easy to get a permit. You apply for it online, it's free.
Correct.
And there's a little bit of red tape you have to work through, a little bit of planning. Organizers have to speak with your office, get some information. And it's really to ensure, safe passageway for not only the parade, but other pedestrians and traffic that are not involved in the parade. And then also so that notification can be provided to the city and the rest of the community. So they become very aware of street closures, pedestrian walkway closures and whatnot, and the time frame that will exist in. I want to talk about the intelligence that's gathered and how you come into contact with those organizers, because although they're not planned, they're often not very secret, are they? They're talked through social media. The community often knows that this protest will be occurring on X day. Rachel, is this something that you are involved in with the planning and the communicating as a police liaison team member?
Yes, definitely. So When we hear about a demonstration that's going to occur or a protest that's going to occur and that their permits haven't been obtained, our job is to gather the information. So we won't gather the intelligence. We will connect with the stakeholders that are involved, whether it's the demonstrators, the leader of the demonstration that's going to be there, say if they're taking, it might be the city itself, or if they're on somebody's property or whatever area they are in, we'll ensure that we're communicating with any stakeholder that's involved or that has a responsibility to what's going on. So our job as the liaison officers is to gather as much information, how many people are going to attend. We want to make sure everybody's safe. We want to make sure everybody's able to exercise their rights. But to do that, it still needs to be lawful. So we explain that there's jeopardy behind if you take the roadway, what's going to happen if you take the roadway, that there is a jeopardy to that, as well as if there's mischief to property and damage to anything. So we are very forthcoming with the jeopardy that comes with not following the law, but also that you're able to exercise your right to demonstrate and to gather in groups. So things such as wearing masks and covering your faces when you're demonstrating, damaging property, taking the roadways. There's a whole lot of information that's provided. We give the demonstrators and the stakeholders what their responsibilities are when they're exercising their right and the expectation of lawful, peaceful, and safe. And by doing that, I feel like it really opens up the communication to have for next time to go through the permit route and to understand that, you know, if we have the time and we have the resources, we're able to assist people on exercising their rights and to do so lawfully and peacefully and safely.
Colin, you're shaking your head. Talk us into this a little deeper.
Okay, so I think what Brian and Rachel have done is sort of set the stage for how information comes in, and our modern approach. Historically, when I joined crowd management in 2003, it was a reactive unit. There was a protest, the police were perhaps monitoring it, and then the crowd did something and the police reacted. That is not the approach nowadays.
Do you mean like arrested or handcuffed or they moved in?
All of us, the crowd would perhaps do something that the police deemed egregious, and they forced our hand, and the police had to react. And that is not at all what we do nowadays. It is absolutely a proactive model where any opportunity for folks like in Rachel's office or in Brian's office to get out in front and start building these relationships with people, talking to them. How can we help you achieve a safe and successful event is essentially the mantra that Dave, it's completely proactive versus reactive. And that's just one of the elements in which things have progressed in our modern approach to policing these events.
And is this working? Are they agreeable for the most part?
For the most part, I think, you know, one of the failures previous to that was that there was no communication. Yeah. Right? It was, you know, we would show up as the police and there was an event, whatever that event is. Part of the communication between, you know, maybe Rachel's office or my office when we reach out to these organizers is one of the first questions we have is what's the goal of this event? What do you as the organizer want to see, right? Through those communication and through that rapport or through that consistent, you know, repetitive kind of engagement, we have built a system with many of these people that we, you know, we'll see them walking down the street and we'll say, hey, you know, hey, how's it going? But the simple fact of the matter is that they now understand that we are there to help them when we can. But as the organizer, you know, in many cases, the event goes very well. Yes. Right? The event goes off, police do their thing, the organizers or the group does their thing. Where it starts to fail or where it gets dangerous is that the organizer loses control of the group or maybe an element within the group. And we can help with that, right? Is, you know, we're watching for that. But that communication, knowing what the goal of the event is, we can work towards that same kind of situation. We're not just worried about a group of people gathering at Portage and Main for what purpose, right? And Colin talked about reacting. If we know what's happening, we know when it's happening, we know who's going to be there, and we've talked to them beforehand, now we don't need to go in with this massive force. We can show up with a few cars to help hold traffic points or something. So it's a much more controlled, much more regulated, I guess, if you want to call it that way, response to these events. And the communication is huge. It's 90% of what we do.
Or managed. Is a good word that we use. I think one of the things that we all will agree on is that I think there's a misnomer in the public that the police don't support people's rights to protest and demonstrate, and that most certainly is not the case. The police are absolutely supportive of that as long as it's safe, peaceful, and lawful. You know, as a service, we police behaviors, not beliefs. And any way that we can help people express those charter rights of expression and assembly and do it in a safe and lawful way, we will support that every day of the week.
Okay, I love that. We police behaviors, not beliefs. That's a great adage. Who wants to talk about the largest event that public order policing worked within our city, was a framework for, and I believe it's the Black Lives Matter
for my opinion on the matter. I think that is the biggest event. Brian may have numbers to support a different assertion. However, I do believe that the BLM protest was our largest and our most successful.
Why?
It came on the heels of the death of George Floyd in the U.S. About a week and a half later. It was a polarizing and emotionally charged time in North American history is an understatement, I think. It was a collection of people who were lawfully protesting beliefs as it pertains to policing. And as such, to police an event that is organized to protest the very existence of policing is challenging, to say the least. And in my opinion, I thought we did superbly. We were there in an extremely large deployment, able to react and respond, to protect people, to ensure order, to ensure it was peaceful. But yet we did so in a way that we didn't incite anyone with regard to the fractured relationship, perhaps, between police and the community that often exists within North America. So there wasn't one arrest. There wasn't any property damage, as far as I'm aware. I think the police would describe it as a successful deployment, and I think the event organizers will have felt as if their goals were achieved. And in the end, if it's a peaceful outcome, I don't know how that isn't a successful outcome.
Yeah, thank you so
certainly
much.
to a degree. Like, we estimated somewhere around 35,000 people for that event, and I think anybody would realize that that's a very large crowd in any city, and certainly it's set records in Winnipeg for an event. But the big thing there is that it's a crowd-driven event.
Yes.
Right? Anytime you put 35,000 people somewhere, you're not going to have enough police resources to control that if it goes poorly. So the organizer, again, and credit to them, they put the word out that this is what we want. We want a peaceful event so that police don't have to get involved. They moved from point A to point B. They obviously took the roadway, but it was one of those situations where the police facilitated the movement. We kept traffic away from them. It's hard to do traffic and be in a low observability posture, but traffic is duty. Traffic duty is traffic duty. But they made their way there. They made their way back. I don't know of any reports of any damage anywhere along the way. And like Colin said, there was absolutely no arrests. So, I mean, compared to how that went in other cities, I think Winnipeg ended up very well.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, do we have a front row seat to what happens south of our border? And do we learn from that? And if so, let's talk about it.
I think anything that happens south of the 49th does affect us, through social media or through whatever the context of that event is. But even across Canada, with the advent of social media, you see things like the trucker convoy or different events like that, where it's grown and it's built grassroots through social media. So Winnipeg does see these events affecting Winnipeg. We had the trucker convoy here. We had it in Coutts. We had it in Emerson. We had it in Ottawa. But I think through the use of this CACP framework and the PLTs and the planning, we come up with a very robust plan that can be endorsed to the membership, and they buy in, right? I mean, it's very difficult if we're trying to tell somebody to do something they don't want to do, they're not going to go for it. But over the last few years since Black Lives Matter, we've proven that this works. Mm-hmm. The framework is substantial. Mm-hmm. It allows the planning team to have something to work with. It allows us to go and brief our members that are going out to these events. And we've now got a history of success where we can now go to these members and say, this works if we do it our way. Certainly policing in a public order context is different than just policing on a regular everyday basis. If I see somebody breaking a window, while I'm walking down the street on general patrol, they're going to get arrested. But if I see somebody breaking a window during a protest where I've got 35,000 people, you may incite the crowd to do that. So you got to be very careful about how you do it. And I think the way we're doing it right now is working very well.
And thank you again for bringing that point up, because the public does not always agree with the idea of public order policing. They feel like you're giving in, we're giving in. I'm hoping after this podcast, they'll understand a little bit more about the framework and why it works and why it continues to work throughout North America and why we're using it, locally. But is there some discretion? Because you've mentioned there's sometimes some damage. We've had incidents, we've had broken windows, we've had rocks thrown, we've had some minor assaults during some protests, we've had some situations. What do we say to those when people aren't always getting arrested, or the follow-up isn't there the way the public believes it should be? Now, I'm not saying it's not getting investigated, because we can assure you that it is, but sometimes it's not possible to, say, identify somebody, or like you said, you have to look at the big picture. If a window's getting broken during one of these scenarios, are we just letting it? Talk to me.
I can certainly speak to that. That these incidents where there is assaults, there is damage, those matters are forwarded to our investigative units.
Okay.
Major crimes, for instance, deals primarily with a lot of those. And there have been arrests made in damages and assaults. The issue is that they're often weeks and months after the event, and quite often it isn't as newsworthy in that moment. So I think it's important for the public to know that, to what Brian's saying, although the police may choose in the heat of a public order event not to act, that doesn't mean that we're not going to, and that there's a free pass to cause damage or anything like that. Far from it. The police will follow that up, investigate it. We have video surveillance now. Most public places have it. We have social media live streaming from people in the crowd. So getting evidence to support any criminal prosecution or investigation is there, and we will follow those matters through.
The biggest thing too is when, as liaison team members, we go into these situations and provide that jeopardy, and we give that to the leadership of persons that are demonstrating in the groups, and let them know that if this does occur, these things can happen. So, and everything is live streamed. Everything is posted everywhere on social media. We do our best as liaison members to have that communication in an impartial way. We are still police officers, but when it comes to communicating and having persons exercise their rights, we have to do so and step back and look at, like you said, we don't police people's beliefs, we police behaviors. So everybody is entitled to have their belief system and to exercise that right. So we just ensure that they know how to do so, but also that police aren't here to hinder you, we're here to help you. And we want to make sure everybody around us is safe as you exercise that.
And Danny, if I may, I think what's important there is the national framework from the Chiefs of Police, the Association of Chiefs of Police, spoke to impartiality. And I can assure you that the service's approach to any public order issue is impartiality. But impartiality is not neutrality. Mm-hmm. So although we remain impartial to all sides, at some point, if an enforcement action is required, either to restore order and restore peace, or make arrests, that we will do that. But often in the very moment of the event itself, making a move to arrest someone for damaging property may not be best suited in that moment.
Right.
I'd like to add, it's that the most and the best work that's done is the pre-engagement work.
Oh, okay.
So having the opportunity to have that communication prior to the event, because once the event begins, tensions are high, emotions are high as well. And we understand that. We understand that being police officers too, liaison officers, when we make our communication, we don't go in our regular uniform. We understand that at times the uniform can be a barrier in itself. So to have those communications and to be able to have it in a good way where there's a good understanding and open dialogue between everybody involved. We attend in plain clothes, so we'll wear like a nice polo shirt with our uniform pants, not with the stripe. And I feel like that is a big help in opening up that communication and takes a barrier away to ensure that we can get that pre-engagement work done, get as much information as we can to ensure the safety of everybody involved.
Yeah, I have to absolutely agree with Rachel there. To me, the biggest innovation in public order policing, and it's been relatively recently, and I'm sure they could both speak to that, is this pre-event aspect. The ability of special events and PLT working hand in hand to proactively engage with the community, with organization leaders, build those relationships, and it doesn't stop. It isn't like they work with them in the pre-event. It's as we get to the event day and as we're working through it, the communication there is absolutely massive, and it's been such a game changer in the way police manage these events, that getting out in front and working with people and constantly liaising with them, it's nonstop.
Yeah.
For them.
Yeah, and I would say probably one of the worst events that we've run into on a regular basis is that you'll have an event, whatever that event is, and then you'll have a group that wants to counter that event, right? So we may put 2 police liaison teams on the ground to talk to both sides, right? And then again, the organizer wants to have a peaceful, lawful, safe event. The other group may want to prevent that, right? But that communication again between those 2 groups is can you go to, that side of the street, or can you go, down the block or something, and you can have your event there and you can have your event there, right? Everybody sees each group, everybody knows that they have a group or a message to get out there. But it's really the boots on the ground from the PLTs that can now provide information to the event commander or the site officer saying, we've got good communication with this group. They're in control. We know what's happening. But we have had situations where the 2 groups engaged, right, to those elements that maybe aren't listening to the organizer. And you may have to put, a crowd management line of troops just down the sidewalk for a minimum amount of time, just till everybody kind of cools down. They kind of realize, okay, this isn't where we want to go with this. And we have, in recent history, put crowd management, public order policing in place, and we've been very successful at it.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Yeah, I think to what Brian's getting at, it's policing a crowd is like policing generally speaking, and at times we may have to apply force. Now, force means we may have to implement tactics to disperse the crowd and that sort of thing. That's an extremely rare, certainly in Winnipeg, outcome, and it's something that the PLTs and special events is working to avoid, because they've built a relationship where we can, facilitate a successful event. However, Brian's office will start a risk analysis right at ground zero and assessing what are the risks, what could go wrong, and they have to be prepared for it. And that will be implementing contingencies so that if disorder starts to appear on the horizon or seems imminent, they're able to initiate the incident command. The incident commander
Oh, good. I'm glad you brought that
will
up.
be able but then it all comes back to the PLTs who are engaging with leaders and people at the event to say, we're seeing concerning behaviors. Police are going to be forced to react here, and in work to restore order.
So you've made a couple things very apparent, but one of them is, Brian, your office, special events. So just in case everyone's like, what's Brian's office? Well, you guys are obviously the juice. You're the pre-planning juice.
I don't know about that, but let's
I want to talk about... You mentioned incident command, so I'm getting a sense it's just more than you just scrolling through some social media. Like, talk about incident command, if you will.
So
how much you can talk about
So part of it, and again, I won't get into tactics, but very simply, if we become aware of an event, whether somebody calls us or we see it on social media, or the PLTs are talking to somebody saying, hey, we're having an event on such and such a date, we will start to collect information on that. Right? When is it? Where is it? How many people are coming? What's the group? And if we can engage, with the police liaison teams, say, hey, can you contact the organizer and see what's going on? Some groups will purposely try and keep that secret, right?
Sure.
That automatically becomes part of our risk assessment, right? Why are they keeping it secret? If we know what's happening, it's a group that we dealt with on a previous occasion, or it's an annual event or something like that, that makes it a little bit easier. We can go back to our after action reports, which have been mentioned, and say, what happened last year, right? Is this kind of similar to what we saw? We will start looking at what's happening in the world, right? What happened on what was the media story last night, or what's the current, take on, 450 Broadway on this event, or 510 Main Street, or,
Sure.
What does the public see? So that all becomes part of our risk assessment. And if it's a low risk event, obviously the easier the job is, the fewer people you need to do it. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody.
What would be a high risk event?
A high risk event would be something like the Black Lives Matter, right?
Okay.
Where you've got a situation where maybe the organizers aren't talking to you, right? That would be a problem in that we don't know, so we have to overstaff.
Sure.
Right? Because we don't know where it's going, or how long it's going to be, or how long it's going to last, or, that sort of thing. Even the whiteout party, to a certain degree, could be a high risk event, depending on who you talk to and how you assess it, right? Anytime you put a crowd together and now you start adding alcohol and a certain, emotional response, right? All of a sudden, now you're in game 7 overtime and you lose, somebody's going to be upset. Maybe me. But it's one of those situations where, again, you won't be able to plan for it. So we try and get as much information as we can. Some of that information is from the organizer. Some of it is from what we find. To kind of give you some idea of numbers, just as of this morning, we're at 235 events that we've either monitored or managed this year. And through the efforts of the police liaison teams and ourselves, we've managed not to put police resources at almost 50% of those events.
Okay.
So that alone saves us from having to go to these different events and put a car or two there and have them say, well, there's nothing going on here, right? So those units are now allowed to go do other duties or other community events or
Other
whatever is going
proactive
on,
work,
right?
sure.
The other 48% of the events we've had somebody go to, right? And that might be just the police liaison teams going to meet with these people and say, hey, what's going on? Or maybe them plus maybe a community support unit or something, where it's a small response just to help out, maybe block a road or something. But the management of those different events, it's significant if you can turn off 50% of the police responses to some of these events. The other ones, they're big, right? Between,
Some of them you can't
whiteout parties and Pride Parade and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a significant planning process to get into the dozens of officers.
Is diversity important in your unit, and why?
Well,
Why does that benefit?
Being able to have diversity in our unit and that trauma-informed response and the way that we communicate and an understanding, I think it's invaluable with where it gets my teammates and I in communicating. Being able to have diverse people, diverse community backgrounds. A lot of the time people don't understand that a lot of our officers don't come from well-to-do places, and they have experienced similar struggles that persons that are demonstrating have experienced. And being able to have that perspective and the communication about that, and humanizes us. Like, we are humans as well. We are people. We do feel, and we do invest a lot into this. We want nothing but for everybody to be safe. And I think that comes through in our communication, and being a diverse group of people, that helps as well.
An extension of that one of the elements within the framework that the service is applying is an educational piece, and the PLTs and special events, and then really every member of the service, but certainly the heavy lifting is with the PLTs and special events. They're trying to gain some understanding of what the issues are at play. Often we have groups from the same country who have very strong conflicts between them,
Right.
and to someone new to that conflict, it's difficult. So these members are trying to get a sense, because in order to police properly, to liaise properly, to try and help them plan an event that's lawful and safe, you have to have some sense of what the issues are between them. So again, for the service, this is where the PLTs and special events have been so important in sort of acquiring some of that background and helping us to understand, so that we can try to facilitate a peaceful event.
Yeah, and I think part of that is by having a full-time unit, and we're one of the few services that have a full-time planning group.
The special event.
Yeah, special event
okay.
unit, right? There's certainly police services out there where it's, hey, today it's Colin's turn, or it's Rachel's turn next week, or whatever. So by having that full-time unit in there, again, we've got that repetitive ability to follow up. We've got after action reports that we're filling out. But the other thing that we haven't really mentioned is that, we talk about policing the event itself and the rights of the people that are in the event. The other thing we have to be careful of is that, the citizens, the public,
Yes.
has rights to
Yeah.
unhindered passage, or the rights to, have their thing as well. So just because you want to go have an event, and now police may have to show up to facilitate moving traffic around that
Right.
event, right? You're not allowed just to stop traffic per se. So the rights that we're enforcing, the rights that we're policing, are also of the public outside of the event, and I mean entirely outside of the
Well,
event.
and that's
So-
massive. And I think I touched on that very early on in this podcast, because I said many of the community members think we, as in the public order policing establishment, the units that are doing even the pre-planning, are siding with these events. But I think you've done a really, really good job at painting a picture of how, look, people have these rights to do these expressions, these protests, and we want the entire community to benefit in the sense that they're unhindered, they're safe, they're unharmed. And when we plan it, we have a specific time frame. There are unplanned, and you manage it the best you can. And so far, you've just discussed a number of examples. Colin, I know it's not your full-time unit, but I introduced you as being part of the crowd management unit. We'd be remiss in not just briefly talking about that. What is the crowd management unit? Who does it consist of?
The crowd management unit is a part-time unit that comprises approximately 120 members that make themselves available for all public order events as required. As well, we work, our unit is the unit that polices jet games, bomber games, concerts, and that's all through special duty. That's the event organizers like True North. They pay to have police those events. We were the singular public order policing tool 20 years ago, and now we are part of this team, and we're important, but we're no more important than the PLT's special events. I think it's worth noting that there's units like the drone unit and the community support units are massive now in our deployments for public order. Foot patrol downtown. All of these units provide this blanketed multi-unit approach where we are able to police these events, and if required, and we need to increase force options, it's there for us. But again, this is all part of that measured, impartial, and education-based approach that we're trying to implement for the city.
And you mentioned training. I'd just like to jump in there real quick.
Yeah, that's a great
So
last point.
training, obviously CMU has very specific training, right? And they have their guys and girls are trained on it. We've implemented some training within the special events unit as well. So we have the operational planning course. We've trained almost 100 officers in that, some of which are the CMU officers and police liaison teams. We've also trained site officers, so they act as an intermediate between the event commander and the troops and the resources that are on the ground. So they've been trained in this, and again, they've been brought up to speed on the CACP framework and why we do what we do. Some of our members in our special events unit have done the PLT training. So again, there's all this, call it cross-pollination if you want to do it. It's basically what it is. It's, what you guys are being trained on, we've are aware of, you're aware of what we're doing or why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And then as that training expands out into the membership, it becomes much more supported. Yeah.
I think we could probably go another hour, but we can't. So I'll do a statement and then a question to finish. So I'm hoping our audience has a better idea of what the concept of public order policing is. Who benefits from it on both sides, the people that are involved in the events and the public who's not involved, the planning that goes into it, the communication that goes into it, the execution that goes into it. And I'd like to just ask you all a final question and put you right on the spot.
No, sure.
I want to ask you all the same question. Why do you love being part of this strategy, this framework, whether it's just specifically in your unit, or just tell me what you really enjoy about it and why you stay doing this
I'm
work.
smiling, so I'll go first
You
if
do
I
like
may.
this stuff.
Maybe give you guys time
He
to
loves
come
this
up
stuff.
with an answer. It's honestly, for I don't know how many bomber games and jet games, there's an energy and an excitement and an exhilaration at so many different crowd-based events that I prefer working a jet game than going as a fan. I don't know. There's something about being part of the I know it's ridiculous, but there's an energy to it, and I see it. I see it in the special events office, in the PLTs. It's a group of people. It's our team coming together to pull off a successful event, and you feel like you're part of the event. And we get all kinds of. I've done things from Olympic torch relays to Prince Charles visits to just recently we were here when the Prime Minister. So you get all these really unique experiences.
I gotta say, I love the relationships that come with being a liaison, being in community policing, Indigenous partnerships as well. That's what keeps me going. I love the people that I meet, the people I get to talk to, the different perspectives that I get to learn, and then I get to imply in my own life and then to utilize. I love the teams that we work with and how great you see when it works out where demonstrators get to lawfully and peacefully demonstrate and do so safely, everybody around safe. Nothing is better than at the end of the day when everything goes beautifully. Everybody feels good about the event. Everybody's happy that from the start to the finish of the communication that's happened, the difference that they feel the communication with police was, because that may not have been the opinion going in, but at the end of the event, they're like, oh, wow, this is not what I thought it was going to be, and I like the way this turned out. So I find that extremely fulfilling. And the relationships and just how it's been working. It works great.
You always have a smile on your face, so I'm assuming it's very personally rewarding, but very externally as you see the community pulling together, and you know that you were part of that and your team was part of that. So thank you so much. Brian Wurm, why is this your jam?
I think, I stand on the shoulder of giants. When I came to the unit 4 years ago, I was a single officer. And now, like I said, we've got a team behind us, and we're implementing with a number of other units. and I, like anybody else, like to be involved in something that's successful, and we're building on that success. But on a personal level, I've been almost 30 years in uniform, either with my military time or with the police. And in both uniforms, I wore the Canadian flag. I think that's very important. It's seen in the world as important. And I think people here in Winnipeg like that they can be in Canada doing what they see as their rights and their abilities, because there's many, many countries out in the world that this would be, well, let's go with not allowed, and we'll stay there.
And we're very grateful.
And we are very lucky to be where we are, and it's good in this situation where we can support people to do that. So that's my jam.
That is such a fitting way to end this all. That actually made me feel a little choked. Like, that got to the heart of it, right? So
You got me, Brian. You got me.
Thank you, Colin, Rachel, Brian.
Thanks for having us.
We appreciate you coming. I hope we've explained a little bit more about public order policing, and we will have show notes. I hope you will like and share this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to WPS After Hours. Highlights and links referenced in this episode can be found in our show notes. Please subscribe and share.